we had so much of an eventful day, so many power-packed session, informative, so much of knowledge exchange, and then let's move forward for one more powerful exchange of knowledge. And I will say this is a very interesting topic to talk about. With incoming UCC and data privacy regulations, how a consent management platform can help the enterprises build a trust and a transparent for enhanced customer engagement. Well, to show some more light on this fantabulous topic, I have and I shall call upon Mr. Prabhat Kumar, Chief Executive Officer, CERF Solutions Private Limited, as a moderator for the followed session. Well, Prabhat Kumar is an industry leader and a tech entrepreneur with over 2.5 decades of proven track record of converting business ideas into successful business. A thought leader and a strategist in CPaaS domain, he is a person behind building up leadership in company in India, scaling revenues from scratch to 1,000 crores. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, he is a founding member and a director of Esports Federation of India and is continuously working towards making esports a mainstream sport and a billion sport industry. Well, his new initiative, CERF Solution Private Limited, provides customer experience and authentication products to enterprises. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a huge round of applause for Prabhat Kumar?
Thank you, Shweta. Good afternoon, everyone. Before starting the panel discussion, I would like to set the context. Let me ask the first question to all the audience. How many people have received a call like this? Hi, मैं ABC बोल रहा हूँ. सर, मैं प्रभात कुमार से बात कर रहा हूँ. हाँ, आप प्रभात से बात कर रहे हैं. सर, क्या आप प्रॉपर्टी लेंगे? हमारे पास तो प्रॉपर्टी बेचेंगे. तो मैंने बोला कि नहीं, मेरे पास तो प्रॉपर्टी नहीं है. तो क्या सर प्रॉपर्टी लेंगे आप? दूसरा कॉल, मे बी मस्ट बी रिसीविंग समथिंग लाइक, सर आपको लोन चाहिए, होम लोन चाहिए, या फिर क्रेडिट कार्ड चाहिए. मे बी यू मस्ट बी रिसीविंग एन SMS ऑन दैट. The problem is not receiving these messages or a call. We receive every day a call from our office, personal call. Do we object to it? No. The basic question here is, and why we get annoyed that have I given you a consent to call me? That's the biggest question. If I have not given you a consent, why did you call me? If I have given you a consent, let's say I'm busy also, I will tell you, okay, call tomorrow. That's one part of irritation. The other part, which you guys must have heard about Cambridge Analytics fiasco or scandal, what we call. The entire scandal was not talking about data usage. The millions of Facebook users' data has been collected without consent. That was the biggest problem. To adhere to that, worldwide, every government to protect consumer privacy, they have come up with different regulations. So I'll walk you through a small presentation which will talk about worldwide as well in India, what is happening in terms of regulation. Then we'll call our panelists to discuss further on that. Secondly, these regulation is one part to it, but the basic question is it only regulation or enterprise can take advantage of these regulation and create trust in the customers? That's the second thing we should like to discuss. So let's run a small video and then we'll call the panelist.
Consentica presents Consent Management Overview. In a globally connected world, data privacy and data security is a major concern for all stakeholders. UCC are communications made to subscribers without their knowledge or willingness via voice calls or SMS. Apart from being inconvenient, such communications also have an impact on people's privacy. Trust is the new KPI. Consent is equal to trust. Consent means any voluntary permission given by the customer to sender to receive commercial communication related to specific purpose, product or service. Legal framework that sets guidelines for the collection and processing of personal information are evolving globally. General Data Protection Regulation Compliance. As the world's most comprehensive data protection legislation, the GDPR requires organizations to operationalize and demonstrate compliance with many requirements and principles for personal data processing. The EU's GDPR paved the way for data privacy and protection laws around the world, and one of the latest is the emerging Personal Data Protection Bill in India. The Telecom Commercial Communications Customer Preference Regulations. To prevent customers from receiving unsolicited commercial communication, TRAI has revised the rules for telemarketers and enterprises for sharing bulk SMS voice call services in India. Presently, TCCCPR guidelines is governed using distributed ledger technology DLT, and of its 4 phases, 3 have already been implemented. Of the 4th phase, digital consent and preferences yet to be implemented. While soon to be enforced Digital Personal Data Protection DPDP, Bill 2022 is a legislation that frames out the rights and duties of the citizen on one hand and the obligations to use collected data lawfully of the data fiduciary on the other hand. Is your organization ready to navigate the new ecosystem? Let's open the floor for the panel discussion on the topic.
You can call.
So let's move ahead for the panel discussion, and for doing so, I shall now call upon Mr. Ajit Anantharaman. Can we have a huge round of applause for Ajit Anantharaman? Ajit is a Chief Information Security Officer and a certified GDPR Data Protection Officer for the Hansa Cequity group of companies, and he has over 2 decades of IT expertise. He is also a certified lead auditor for ISO 27001-2022 standard. In addition, he is also involved with designing the enterprise-grade custom technical MarTech solutions. Can we have a huge round of applause for Mr. Ajit Anantharaman? Joining him will be Dwarkanath Gopinath. Mr. Dwarkanath Gopinath is a Vice President of Messaging and VAS Business Vodafone Limited. Well, he is heading the Messaging and VAS segment for VI Carrier Services under Vodafone Business Services for more than 1.5 years, and he has expertise in telecom professional in the carrier domain from nearly 20 years of expertise. Can we have a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? Joining them on stage is Soumadri Sen. Soumadri, now Chief Operating Officer at VISPL, started his professional career with FMCG giant Hindustan Unilever in 1992. During his career span of 3 decades, he worked with Nestle, Modi Telecom, Bharti, Bell World, ACL Mobile before taking a charge at VISPL in 2016. Can we have a huge round of applause for Soumadri Sen? And next, joining them on stage is Rohit Agrawal. Well, Mr. Rohit Agrawal is a Managing Director of RiskBerg Consulting, a certified in implant leading IT risk and compliance advisory firm. Well, he is a technology risk and compliance enabler with more than a decade of experience in information risk, cybersecurity, and privacy domains. He has profound insight into global regulatory requirements and compliance framework standards, including ISO 2700, NIST, GDPR, PCI, DSS, data privacy, cybersecurity, supplier risk and internal and external tech assurance, security and privacy advisory, and that's not all, even risk, digital risk management. He has historically worked with global MNCs like Tata Consultancy Services and Genpact, leading multiple global engagements for more than 80 plus Fortune 500 companies across various industry verticals. Can we have a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Mr. Rohit Agrawal? Joining them in the panel discussion is Mr. Pranay Saxena. Mr. Pranay Saxena is an accomplished tech entrepreneur with over 2 decades of an extensive experience in building technology platform. That's not all. Over the years, he has also been instrumental in creating scalable, reliable, secure, and robust enterprises-grade products. Pranay is a hands-on CTO and has an exceptional ability to optimize technology operations by enabling agility, security, and resilience within ecosystems. Currently, he is a founder and a CTO of VSPAGY, which is a personalized and a video interactive platform. Can we have a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for our panelists?
Okay, so we have set the context. I think now we can start the discussion. So I would like to ask to start with Soumadri. Soumadri, you have been in this industry for almost 15, 20 years, right? And you have seen the entire TCCPR guidelines of 2012 to 2018. Just to understanding purpose, can you explain what exactly it is, how it is going to impact the enterprises, what are the changes required in a very simple manner so that people can understand this is the regulation is all about.
Okay, thanks Prabhat. Good afternoon everybody. I know it's a difficult session just after lunch, but we'll try our best to keep it interactive and engaging. So TCCCPR 2018 was brought out by TRAI and the implementation took quite a while. We started the process in 2019 because this was the first blockchain-enabled regulation in the world that was put out. The task was humongous. Just to set the context, at that point of time, enterprises. So let's understand how the three components of an A2P SMS. There's an A party, there's a B party, and there's a content of the message. A party is basically the header. The B party is the mobile number of the subscriber, and then the content of the message. Now, initially, before this regulation came in, so an enterprise, even as large as an SBI, did not have a unique header assigned to them. So SBI BNK could be used by anybody and a message could be sent using that header to a customer. So the customer, when they receive that message, would think that this is a message which is coming directly from SBI. So that was the biggest challenge. We addressed that challenge as you know, in the presentation Prabhat showed, that we've completed 4 stages. In the DLT platform, all enterprises are now whitelisted. So every enterprise has a unique PEID, and with that PEID, headers are allocated to them, and there is a process where they apply for the headers, and there is a team at the back end which all the telcos have set up to to authenticate whether this header can be given to there has to be a relevance of that particular header to the brand or the company that has been registered as a PE, and corresponding to the header, there is a template that needs to be registered, and when a message comes in, it's a simple old SMS, but then let us also understand that a simple old SMS has a very, very complicated journey it traverses from the beginning, which is an application of an enterprise till it reaches the end client. So the 3 phases have been completed. The 4th phase is where we are saying that from a customer perspective, a customer has to give a consent, and that has to be digitally acquired and digitally proven that an enterprise has reached out to a customer, that customer gives a consent, and then so that when a message comes in and if there is an UCC or if there is a complaint raised by the customer, the enterprise should be in a position to say that, no, this is a consent which I've received for the customer, and based on that, I've sent this message. So this is what we are trying to address.
Okay, thank you, Soumadri. So taking this question further, so Dwarika, you have, as a Vodafone, you have implemented consent management as a first operator, right? It's live. Can you please explain what exactly the process of consent management and how enterprise can go and buy the consent, and what are the process actually for a digital consent?
Yeah, sure, Prabhat. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to elaborate on what Soumadri spoke. So consent in the presentation, have you seen, it's a voluntary choice by the customer who explicitly states that I want to receive a marketing message from a particular enterprise. So this is the basis of consent. Now, how do enterprises go on acquiring consents? And more importantly, why do enterprise need to acquire these consents, right? So TRAI has mandated that consents acquired by telecom operators will be the digital truth, and it will be immutable, it will be irrepudiable, it will be the certain truth that enterprise ABC has acquired a consent from a person with this mobile number, and he's opted to receive marketing and commercial communication. So this is something which is mandated by TRAI. Now, how do enterprises go on about getting these consents? There are multiple modes. There is the QR code. So for example, enterprises can go to our portals, and for that particular brand, they register the scope of the consent, they register, and they generate a QR code. This QR code will be available at their POS terminals, wherever there is a customer engagement. It can be at the retail stores, it can be in walk-in banks, it can be at the malls. The second thing is through a website. So enterprises can send an SMS which will have a URL. The person clicks on that URL, he enters his details, he enters the details for which brands he has opted for, and he can register his consent. The third is through an API-based call. So enterprises can, through an API call, send messages to that particular database which they have and seek consents. Once a customer responds with a positive message like yes, it gets stored on the database, which is the DLT. So that's how you acquire it.
Okay, thanks for the information. So I have spoken to a lot of enterprises regarding this DLT implementation, and the consent management. Few of the enterprises has come up with their concerns, or whatever you call it. They say, as an enterprise, I take digital consent, right? And I have a physical proof also. Then why do we need to go to the consent management platform of a DLT and then again verify as a next level of verification? I mean, they are happy about they can give the entire proof of consent management. Then what changes? Why do we need DLT consent management? I mean, that's the question which enterprises are asking.
A very good question. Okay. Now, when you use SMS as a marketing channel, okay, there are multiple channels, and if you are using SMS as the marketing channel, then SMS is a telco service. The subscriber is first a telco consumer, and then secondary, he's a user of a bank, he's user of an e-commerce, he's user of a insurance or a travel site. So it's based on the logic that the primary consumer belongs to a telco. And since telco is governed by TRAI, and so the blockchain is the only element of truth which certifies that this is the valid digital consent.
Yeah, so I would like to add this. One of the discussion we had in a meeting, when a complaint comes of an enterprise, that does not go back to the enterprise, actually comes to the operator, right? So they have to respond back. The complaint goes to TRI. The complaint goes to the parliament, right? That I am receiving unwanted messages. So the TRI has a full right to, curb this menace, right? So I'll park this discussion of TCCPR for some time, and I'll move to the new regulation which is coming on data privacy, right, which is already a GDPR is already there in Europe and CCNA in California and Canada also. So Ajit, so you have implemented GDPR in many of the organization. Can you tell us the difference, number one, from a GDPR perspective to a DPDP draft, and also what challenges enterprise will face if they do not comply to or they are not ready from today from a DPDP compliance?
Thanks, Prabhat. Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, there's one needs to understand that there is something called as a standard and there is something called as a regulation. The proposed Indian Data Privacy Act, whenever it happens, becomes an act. GDPR, the Consumer Protection Act in the US, every state has a act there. Singapore, Australia, Japan, China, they all have their respective data privacy regulations. They're all acts of their respective parliaments. So therefore, it's binding on every citizen to kind of comply to it. As long as, specific to GDPR, as long as I'm not handling EU customers, I need not bother. So when I first get access to data, the first thing you start with is called as a data impact assessment, which exactly tells you what regulation, what PI, etc., that you bare minimum need to handle. And then you start your journey from there. Now, there are about 7 to 10 principles for data privacy as in general, and all regulations across the world follow these principles. Some may club a few principles and therefore the count reduces, right? So consent is just one of the privacy principle. There are many. So privacy is not about only consent. Privacy essentially says, do you have consent to access my PII, right? While we are referring to here saying that, okay, do I have the consent to send a promotional message? That's the next step, right? The first step is, do you even have access to accessing my PII? As a fiduciary, so GDPR uses the word fiduciary and controller and processor. The Indian version, at least the earlier one, which Justice Sri Krishna had proposed, had the words fiduciary versus intermediary. Essentially, they are the same. So even if I'm not having access to data physically with me, but I can actually see the data, I still am liable or I need to comply with those regulations, right? So consent is just possibly one of the most important aspects of data privacy principles, but you have rights of the data subject, and there are a host of other things that one needs to comply. Your question on what's the difference between the Indian version versus GDPR, as you rightly said, GDPR is generally referred to the gold standard. Whenever we work for clients where there's an international business, especially when you have multiple countries, it's humanly impossible to be complying with every country's regulation. So you generally tend to go with GDPR, which possibly is 70, 80%, 85% of all countries' basic requirements. Every country has got some nuances. A specific example is GDPR says that you need to report an incident within 72 hours from the time you come to know about it. Now, I may come to know about a breach 6 months after actually it happened. But from the time I come to know, within 72 hours, the controller has to respond. The controller has the choice whether he wants to go to the supervising authority or not. That's a choice he makes depending upon the data protection officer. For large organizations, it's mandated to have one, and he or she takes that call. Now, if you did not report a reportable incident, that's where the problem starts and the penalties are huge. The California Act, for example, mandates you to report even if there was a potential for a breach. The breach may necessarily not have happened. You would have stopped the breach, but there was a potential, you still report. There is also a country which says that you should protect PI 10 years after the person has died. So there are regulations and there are small nuances, but then about 70 to 80, 85% of all regulations are same. The Indian one is also identical to GDPR, right? There will be some nuances or things which are specific to the way India operates. GDPR, for example, categorizes PI as PI, sensitive PI, critical PI, etc. The Indian ones will also be categorizing what is PI and critical PI. The earlier discussion was, okay, critical PI, sensitive PI should not be transferred out of the country. That's where the earlier one stopped. But I believe now there is a relaxation as long as it's a permitted country, right? So there are going to be some differences. We'll have to wait for the bill to become an act once it's tabled in the budget session. But but then more or less it will be in lines with GDPR.
Great. Thank you very much for the insight. Okay, Rohit, you have been dealing with Fortune 500 companies, especially related to security, cyber threat, and privacy. If Indian enterprises has to deal with, let's say, tomorrow it gets passed and the enterprise has been given, let's say, 6 months to follow. What do you think, what they should be doing one by one? One is, I understand, from data protection officer has to be hired, right? That is one of the costs they have to incur. Apart from that, from an infrastructure perspective, from a security and compliance perspective, how they will prepare themselves?
Well, I think a very pertinent question at this point in time, because we have a lot of regulations coming up which kind of intersect at a point, and it becomes really difficult for people to discern, whether enterprise or the end users, as to what is the actual intent behind each and every regulation that we are trying to put forward, right? Good afternoon, everybody. I have got, fortunately, opportunities to work with almost 7 different regulations in privacy. And just to give you a number, if I'm not wrong, close to 70% of the entire population world, which is close to 134 countries, they have some or the other form of data privacy regulation, whether it is a legislation standard or maybe principle that is set by the government, but it is there. I think India is one country we have to acknowledge that we had some of the clauses in various regulations, like for example, IT Act, almost more than 1.5 decade back. We had a section called IT Section 43A. I'm sure many of you would know about this, which talked a little bit about the personal data, right? But still, there wasn't per se a centralized place to discuss what is the requirement for privacy and how enterprise should look on privacy, take care of the privacy that users want to protect, right? At least have the consent from the user whether they want to protect those privacy elements or not. Which is what, to my mind, this DP would do, which is digital personal data protection. Still, there is a digital annotation that we have to see how it goes. Now, to your question, how and what the enterprise would need to do in order to get it implemented, you have to understand it has various facets. Like, at this point in time, if I heard Ajit saying about the GDPR, definitely that's the gold standard, but one of the complexities of GDPR that I hear from most of the customers or the enterprise globally, it's not only in India, globally as in whosoever is referring GDPR as a base standard. The problem is to discern what is the key requirement. It becomes so complex for even the technical people to understand and put forward those controls in their environment. Maybe at times because of the mammoth or the size of the data that they are dealing with, or maybe the customers that they are dealing with, or the further joint data custodians or the data controller that are present. The whole ecosystem to have the GDPR implemented or the likes of GDPR implemented becomes a really complex proposition, right? Now, the beauty of DPDP that I see today is that it's fairly easy. Like, you have 30 sections. I'm sure that each and every one of you in the room can go ahead and read it in plain vanilla language, and will be able to at least get 70-80% of it. Now, how to translate it into actual controls so that it can be put forward in the organization is a question, because there are many, for the lack of better term, loose ends, I would say, in the current form of the bill that I've seen. Like, there are too many. For example, there are no clear mandate as to what is going to be the significant data fiduciary, as you call them, right? Of course, there is a provision that central government can come up and call who all are going to be data fiduciaries of significant length and breadth, because there are parameters defined on which parameter you will say that. Now, to your other question of whether this enterprise ecosystem is ready, I don't think there's going to be a straightforward answer to this, because the current form in which the data lies in our ecosystem in the tech space, Indian tech space, is really complex. If we give, even if we talk about giving consent to one data fiduciary, how it translates to the other data fiduciary or the data processors per se who take the data from data fiduciary, that's really complex system. I believe putting forward the security controls would not merely solve the purpose. There has to be more to it. People have to understand what's the exact requirement, and certainly we have to wait to see where this bill actually goes, because there were many elements in the previous version of this bill. I think it has gone 4 iterations, but if you see the previous versions of the bill, there were further very clear-cut requirements laid down, right? Even in terms of technical requirements from security point of view, there were very specific controls put in the bill itself. Which is missing in the current version. It just at a very high level says that you need to protect. It's a wide term. For me, the protection can be merely the antivirus, for example, or anti-malware on my system. Somebody else can comprehend putting DLP, blah, 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 tens of other controls in the system and then safeguard it, right? So what's the reasonability of it needs to be defined.
Great.
I think just the last point on your data controllers, or the significant fiduciaries point of view, whether there is going to be a protection officer needed or not. I think there are 2 beautiful concepts that this bill proposes. One is consent manager per se, which is completely new to me, and it was an interesting topic. We can discuss more about it. And the other is about the independent auditors that they are talking about. Data protection officer, we already know from GDPR and what's the essence going to be, we more or less know. But these 2 are the interesting roles. Maybe we can explore more as we go in the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for the
Wanted
insight.
to add one point to what he said. I think there was one more part to your question as to how do you get started, right? So the easiest way to get started today, while this is still a bill and not an act, is to simply, get certified on PIMS and ISMS, right? So that's a voluntary standard, right? It's not a regulation. You have a choice not to do it. But then, rather than having just a frame on the wall, if you do it in letter and spirit, right, in true sense, it actually covers most of the regulation, all across all the data privacy principles. It will be covering all the aspects, right? And then when this becomes an act, it's very easy. You're almost ready from day one. That's the easiest thing, because it will take easily about 1 to 2 years if you're starting from today.
Great, great. So what we can see here, there are 2. It's fine. Okay. So there are 2 regulations side by side we are talking about. One is a UCC by TRI, another is the Government of India, DPDP rules, right? Now, as an enterprise, I'm just thinking about a healthcare department. So there is another privacy law of healthcare department, right? So it's a chaos for the enterprises, right? But having said that, first of all, we have to define 2 things, which this question is for everyone here who can respond back. What is digital consent, right? Is it needed? Can't be a physical consent be one of the proof of it, right? Or secondly, is that the entire regulation can be framed as Government of India one regulation of privacy, right? Both are privacy. It's a commercial communication or this communication, both are, for me at least, it's a privacy. You are infringing into my privacy, right? So how do you define digital consent from a TCCPR guidelines perspective and from your, DPDP, draft regulations? Anyone can answer this?
We start and others can add. So see, I think the word digital is just, today's day and age, everything is digital, right? So the privacy laws across the world does not use the word digital. It just says take consent as long as you're able to manage the paperwork without it being tampered, and you can preserve it for the life of that consent, right? So consent is always for, for a specific reason and for a specific period. And once that purpose is over, you need to destroy the data or do whatever other action deemed appropriate. If you need to use the same data for an extended purpose, you take a fresh consent because the earlier consent has expired. As simple as that, right? Now, as the earlier speakers rightly said, the DLT regulation uses the blockchain methodology, right? And obviously that's going to be digital. Hence everything, and today everything is stored digitally. We are out of paperwork. Ever since COVID came, it's become more digital. So now the interesting part here is that you need consent when you're doing a WhatsApp campaign, correct? You need earlier, erstwhile, the Google RCS, you needed a consent. You need consent when you're doing the voice calling as well as SMS, etc. You need, and there is a data privacy bill. Okay, possibly email is one area where so far no one has spoken about explicit consent, but there's an unsubscribe. You can opt out, right? Opt out is another principle. So, can we look at consolidating these pieces? Because end of the day, as an organization, I don't use only email or only SMS or only one channel of communication, right? I use mix and match. Today, the age of micro targeting and omni-channel communication, which is the least, send communication, relevant communication to the customer on the most preferred channel at the most preferred time, right? So that I optimize my cost. So which means that I need to take consent and make sure it applies across all places. So that is where I think a point will come when once the privacy becomes an act in India, plus this, TRAI guidelines are also there. At some point, enterprises will start overlapping the concept of consent, and there will be a uniformity which says, okay, let me take the higher of, all, and that applies to everybody. Great, and then I apply it.
Thank you. So, Soumadri and Dwarika, I have a very pinpointed questions on one of the thing. You see, there is always a confusion of what is explicit, implicit, and what is transactional, right? How do you define? Because enterprise are confused, right? When they ask what is implicit consent, what is explicit consent, and so that one of the answer I'm looking from you guys. And Pranay, Saxena, you have been dealing with a lot of enterprises related to your product, and you are servicing all large organizations, especially in banking and finance. So second question to you after this is that, do you see the impact which enterprise will have, after the complete phase 4 of this DLT implementation? So, yeah.
So, what is implicit consent? In my book, and this is what, going by the definition of TRI also, and we've had several discussions on this, any event which is followed by a user-generated activity. So you swipe your credit card, you know that there is a message following. You've taken money out of your bank account, going to the ATM. So obviously you will get a message. You're ordering something and you're getting a message with corresponding to that particular event. That is implicit. So the customer knows that I have taken an action and there is a message following that action. Other than that, nothing else comes under transaction or implicit. Everything else you need explicit consent. Now, explicit consent would mean that service messages. So, say for example, if I, as a policy,
just in between, I'm asking a very straight. Let's say a payment reminder, which is going to come after 1 year when I bought the first insurance. Will that be considered implicit, explicit, promotion? What it will consider? Explicit. And will this consideration will vary from operator to operator, understanding of enterprise to enterprise? How it will be considered?
It is a gray area, but going by the current regulation, it needs an explicit consent. I am responsible. No, I'm coming to that. Yeah. I'm coming to it. I'm a responsible person. I know that my payment will be due, so I will pay on time. You don't have to remind me. If I don't pay, then you can send me a service message. But then for payment reminder, I don't need it. Because what was happening was using this pretext, on top you put in a payment reminder and then tag it along with a promotional message, cross-selling message. That was the challenge. So if you do not want gray areas, then you have to follow.
So I guess a lot of audience will have questions on this. Maybe I'll open this door for audience.
I'll just clarify. Okay. So let's take back your definition. Since all the banking community is here, so any OTP message sent by banks and financial institutions for two-factor authentication, that is classified as transactional. So only OTP messages sent by banks and financial institutions are classified as transactional messages. OTPs by other sectors, they fall under service implicit, and any relationship that can be established by virtue of a purchase, by virtue of a transaction, that comes under service implicit. Now, service explicit, let's talk of an example. A bank ABC Okay, it brings in some customer who only opens a savings account. Now, if you want to send a home loan message or you want to cross-sell your personal loans, then you have to take an explicit consent because your customer has availed only a savings account from you, and vice versa for other products. If someone buys insurance from you, then if you want to sell your home loan or your mutual funds, then an explicit consent has to be taken. And promotional is something where
I have
you
one
are reaching
question.
out your...
Yes.
Dwarka, I have one question to you. You all four are actually discussing how it's a beneficial for the customer, right? Not just think about from the enterprise point of view. The Prabhat has asked me the question, how the enterprise is going to be get affected through this compliance, either is a UCC or the DAPP. Just take an example right now how the enterprise are actually doing the business. You had given the proper example that yes, here I had opened a saving account and I'm start getting the messages for home loan, personal loan. Now, that is the business that the enterprise are doing right now. And they are open to approach complete the customer base where they are selling, doing the cross-sell or the new acquisition. But after the consent come, after that, it means the enterprise don't have any user base to approach for the new product selling. So how the industry will work in that case?
Yeah. So your basic services, okay, of sending OTPs, of notifying your customers, that's not going to get impacted at all. There's absolutely no concern for basic operations. Something that the relationship is there, it continues, so it's business as usual. Now this consent, okay, once taken, it's valid for 1 year. Now, why do we need to take consent? Look, as a marketing, you need a better ROI, right? You can target your customers in a more proper, efficient way. You are targeting people who have explicitly opted for such messages. Currently, you have some XYZ cost from a certain provider, and you have a database, and most of it is carpet bombing. If somebody from the banking community, especially from a marketing department, if they were to share what is the ROI that they get, I am sure that after consent management gets adopted, the ROI is definitely going to be much higher than what it currently is.
Okay, so I'll get into a last part because this discussion will keep on going. I will open the floor for audience also if they have any query related to this. Last, you see, so consent is one part, but regulation or, these things, why this is forced? I mean, the new mantra today is the trust is a new KPI. I forget about these regulations, right? As an enterprise, we all know that if any consumer trusts me, trust my brand, they become loyal to the lifetime, right? And to create that, you need to have a transparency. I mean, that's my view, and that's not my view. A lot of research has gone into it. That trust is a new KPI. The brand start building the trust between the Facebook lost trust because of Cambridge Analytica, right? But still it is running. That's a different thing because they keep buying new companies. So whether it's regulation is there, not there, what is important today is that you need to take consent. If you are communicating with your customers, if you are using that data to somehow without asking, I mean, don't you think, I'm asking everyone here, that rather than thinking about regulation which is going to come and how we are going to implement or how we are going to bypass this regulation, rather than we should try to create a trust by taking consent while communicating, by taking consent while, using their data. I mean, to everyone, I'm asking this question.
So, Prabhat, it is a tough question, and I'll tell you the challenges. Okay. So, from an enterprise perspective, the consent management or the regulatory part is managed by a different vertical. Now, there's a marketing team also. Okay, and they are the ones who have to find better ways of reaching out to customers and keep on adding new customers for a completely different reason. So what has the marketing department, what have they done? They have actually outsourced their business of, or the business of getting new business to affiliates. Now those affiliates have a pool of data, and that pool of data has the algorithms to run that who should be targeted for which particular product, which particular service. So the trust that, I mean, you can only trust, the enterprises themselves have also given up their trust, have given up their database also, thinking that they will get more business. But in the long run, it is hurting them also.
So even what you're saying is that it's a revenue versus,
Absolutely.
a long-term vision, right? So it depends upon how enterprise look at the entire business line. Yeah.
And who in the organization is responsible for which KPI?
So I'll give you an example. Let's say I am a hard fan of Marks and Spencer, right? And actually I look forward for a new offers, actually, right? Because maybe a year once or twice they come up with the good offers, right? But I would like to subscribe only to Marks and Spencer, and that too offer, right? So if Marks and Spencer ask me the consent, I will give the consent and I look forward. So I become more loyal to him, right? Rather than Marks and Spencer, sorry to take the name of the company, but since I am a hard fan, so I want Marks and Spencer to send me and ask me for the consent, and they keep sending me. So what I'm looking at, enterprise side, you can only create trust by building a long-lasting relationship. So what I feel that it is, whether it's a regulation, not a regulation, enterprise should always take consent management, or use consent to communicate with the customer or use their data. Yes, Rohit, you're saying something.
I think you have a very valid point, and we have seen this journey, at least I have witnessed this in the security field, and I'm sure Ajit you will concur to this. Security earlier was taken as an obligation or maybe a kind of burden, if I may say, to few of the companies. Gradually over the decade, people have realized that if you have to sell your product, your services, this has to be ingrained as innate part of your solution. Nowadays, you don't go with a product to customers saying that, B2B especially, right? You don't go to customers saying that you have a product which is insecure. In fact, you put it forward, and even if you don't charge for it, you want to, put it forward saying that my product is secure and this is how it takes care of your data or maybe any other related things, right? So security has become paramount, in fact, as an enabler for you to do the business. Likewise, I am sure that consent would go the same route, be it consent or privacy associated, use cases can be there. But it is going to go that way. So Great. I think it is going to be the next KPI.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ajit, you want to say something? Yeah.
So Hansa Cequity, we are a MarTech company, right? And this problem that you just mentioned is exactly relevant to us, right? We have to bring out marketing solutions. There is a very high cost of acquiring a new customer, right? So once I have a customer, I would like to make sure that I keep him as loyal and maximize my revenue, because there's a lot of cost that goes in acquiring the customer. Now, a customer has come to my organization to buy a product. Now, how do I make him buy B and C and D? Because I need to recover my cost, right? So there's a lot I'm doing. So for every item that he or she acquires from me, there's a lot of investment that has gone behind. Finally, that guy has fallen, for that one item after I reached out to him 10 times earlier. So this is a typical hen and chicken problem. Okay, now if I'm going to take a consent from an Indian perspective, especially for promotional cross-sell, upsell kind of scenarios, 99% of the population will not give a consent. I will have no base to target. My company will stop functioning because there's no revenue coming. There's no bottom line, leave alone top line, right? So now how do I figure out a smart way? Your other question as to why are you mandating to take a consent? I think the answer is very simple. It's an act of the parliament, right? Had it not been an act of the parliament, people would not have taken a consent.
We would not be sitting here talking about it.
Yeah. So now how do I, be legal as well as try to be as much ethical as possible, right? As you gave a right example, can I push a promo within a transaction communication, right? And try to be legally ethical, or I don't know how you want to call it. So, so that's the challenge.
Pranay, as a company, you use a lot of PI data of enterprises. How do you make sure that you are managing their PI data properly and without? I mean, is that anything to do with consent?
See, right now, whatever the PI data that we are receiving, so as per the guidelines, which is because we are majorly working in the BFSI sector. So if you talk about the data that we are processing is complete, and the security measures that we should apply, that is based on the RBI guidelines. And we are following that to secure that data. But now, as Ajit has said, the major concern from the enterprise side is just how we will actually increase our business. Just take an example like Dwarka said, okay, maybe I think Soumadri said, if we are opening an account, then I should get the alerts from the accounts only, not the health insurance, the home insurance. But there is a cost involved to acquire the customer for opening an account. Now, just take an example, if there is a startup, he don't have any customer base. How they will actually approach to the new customers? If there is a consent, so how I can take the consent? There is no way I can take the consent from the end user. The things which is going on right now is, there is an open base. I am just pushing the promotion, the DLT is there, that is fine. Out of complete customer base, maybe 20 or 30% people are registered in the DND database. So still the 70% population is there where I can actually approach them for the to acquire them. But yes, after the consent management, there is a big issue for the enterprises to sustain their business.
Okay. So this discussion will keep on going, and so I will open this discussion for the audience. Any questions from the audience would like to ask?
My name is Sandesh. What is G20 is benefited in this organization?
Could you please repeat the question?
What is G20 is benefited in this system?
G20. So I think G20 is nothing but the top 20 countries, right? The advantage of the G20 summit that happened in Mumbai, or India, I should say, is essentially where India becomes the central driver of such initiatives like data security and those kind of things, right? India gets a better say, and people start hearing what India says, the Prime Minister of India says. That's the main idea. All these countries, the top reps of all these countries assembled, and they discussed how we can make the world safer. Now the G20 is not about only protecting the 20 countries, it is how these 20 countries can protect rest of the world. If everyone is safe, we are also safe, right? We are as strong as the weakest element in the link. So I think that was the whole idea, that you need to, and this thing happens from place to place. This time we were happy to have it in India.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hello. You all will agree, like now UPI has become, day in, day out, our, daily activity, like while making, any purchases or selling anything. So they are like where, like sender always used to see like to whom he is going to pay the money or from where he is going to receive the money. Okay. All this is happening within the single regulation, that is the RBI. Whenever we talk in terms of the cross-border, like we want to have this UPI kind of solution for the cross-border kind of things, where like sender, while sending the money, want to ensure like to whom he is going to send, that money, who is the beneficiary behind that particular UPI ID. So in that scenario, how we can solve through the consent? And even though if we are solving through the consent, are we somewhere like regulating through our PII norms that what RBI spoke about?
Okay, so the concept of consent, as far as now since you talked about cross-border, right? The DLT regulations will not apply there. It is basically the data privacy laws, right? And the concept of consent is, I as a data principal, am I giving you as a data fiduciary consent to access specific data that I approve of for that specific period, for that specific purpose, right? So the data fiduciary, in this case, let's assume that finally the data from India is being transferred to country Y, X to Y, and country Y, there's a bank, and I am a data principal in that country who has an account in that particular bank, right? I would have given consent to the bank to use my data because I am initiating that transaction, whether I am receiving it or I am sending it, right? So there is a consent given by me to use my personal information. Now, where does PI come into place here? A account number is also a PI because I'm able to identify that individual through that account number, right? So I have given the bank the consent to allow UPI as a mode of transaction against my account when I was opening the account, or maybe subsequently when I wanted to use that facility, right? So that is how the concept of consent will work. Obviously, that bank then transfers that consent to the receiving or the sending bank, okay, to say that, yes, you are authorized to receive or send that particular amount to this particular bank because this customer has given me the consent. And that is how you transfer that, chain of consents, right? And eventually, the end-to-end system works.
Okay, thank you. For the second part of that question, does this our RBI norms allow to share our country's financial data to the external entity in the cross-border?
I think that's a trick question because you need to define the financial data. RBI has very specific mandate when it comes to finance data. The terminology that they use for finance data is the financial transaction data. And it is more about the financial transaction data going from here to outside, whether it can or cannot, which is not in this in current scenario. Under the data localization regulation that master directive that they have come up with. To your point, what's the finance data? Like for me, if I know, even the numbers from somewhere, it can be finance data. So I don't know if you have more elaboration to that, but the answer to your current question is you can't have it outside India, as per the current.
Thank you. We'll have a last question I think he wants to ask because of the time issue, I guess.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, good afternoon. I have two questions. First question is maybe larger context of data privacy. And second question is more pertinent to the consent part. I think what I'm seeing with a lot of developments happening, we have been talking about GDPR and Indian data protection bill. But at the bottom of the pyramid in day-to-day life, what we are seeing today for last maybe 10 years or 2 decades, on the how we are handling data from the credit card, when credit card is sold to you, we go to any building, we are supposed to write a name, and then also so many information, and you check into any hotel, they are taking a Xerox copy or photocopy or Aadhaar card. So what do you think, how, even if the data protection bill comes in, this bottom of the pyramid, what day-to-day life we facing of the data, which are totally unprotected, and nobody knows what is happening to those photocopies and other stuff. So what you are thinking, what do you think are going to change? Do you think the paradigm shift will happen to the current practices and how the data will be protected? That is my first question. And second question is more to consent. What is the progress or what is the future of Sahamati as a platform? How that will be really, whether it will be really beneficial for India in a big way or not?
Okay. Yeah, first one. Yeah. So, I'll answer this question with an example and maybe elaborate. So my organization, one of the first companies to have, complied with PIMS, ISMS 27701, which is a privacy information management system, right? Now, if you walk into my organization as a visitor, you have the visitor registry where you are supposed to enter your PI name or whatever, right? Some PI information. We have a notice there which clearly says that we are capturing your data for this purpose, and this is the duration for which we will keep the data and how we are going to be securely disposing of. Even when you walk in, there are CCTV cameras. There are notices up front which says we are recording your face, right? Which is kind of a biometric.
But that's happening at your company.
So
I'm talking today, you go to any,
Yeah, I'm answering.
any office or private buildings.
Yes.
There's a register. And so somebody told me 10 years back, the cheapest and best way to source data is to go to any multi-story building and
Yes.
take a Xerox of those
Correct.
by paying a 10 rupee to the security guard.
Security guard.
10 years back, I heard this story. It's
So
a real story.
I think it's a very pertinent question. Now, why we are doing is because we have to comply with this standard that we have voluntarily subscribed to. Otherwise, I won't get certified. Now, today, if a foreign national comes to India, right? Say a German national comes to India and wants to stay in Taj. Taj has to comply with GDPR regulation because Taj is capturing the PI information, passport, etc. of that German. German is under Europe. So why Taj is doing it is because they are mandated by a particular law. We have to wait now, as you know, earlier we said, today in India, it is only the IT Act that talks about privacy as an act of the parliament. There's nowhere else which mentions the word privacy, etc. So once we get this bill, it becomes an act, then it becomes binding and there are penalties. Tomorrow, if say you or me walk into a similar office or something, and should we realize that my data was captured without my consent, and if I report after this becomes an act, that company becomes liable then, not today. So possibly the only reason why it's not happening is because as you know, he's rightly said, why are we forcing consent? Similarly, once the bill becomes an act, it will become a force.
Obviously consent, then most of us don't know what is happening to data. Because as I told you, that you go to
So
security
there is-
guy and get the data just by
So
paying.
once this becomes an act, a lot of these things will have to be, controlled, because if I report this incident with sufficient evidence, I become liable, and the penalties under this bill, similar with GDPR, are so humongous that a startup or a mid-startup company can cease to exist overnight. Right? So a few instances like this, people will start coming into place. That is where the transparency and notice is a key one of the key principles under privacy which has to be followed. But yes, I agree, it's not being possible.
I think in summary to your question, it is certainly going to happen, as in the shift is certainly going to happen, but of course not in a day. It will certainly take its own due time to get it implemented and
India-
populate down the normal
I think due to time constraint, I think we have to move. There is another.
Well, I think this topic is such of a nature that
very
we'll have
sensitive
more
issue.
questions and we can go on and on with the
I think
discussion.
offline we can keep discussing. I think we are here only,
Definitely.
right? And we can keep discussing about it. Thank you very much. It was a very insightful session, I guess. Thank you, audience, for listening us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we have a huge round of applause? And now I shall request Mr. Shashank Bajpai, Chief Information and Security Officer Credible, to please come on stage and felicitate our panelists with a memento. Can we please take a center stage here? Requesting Shashank Bajpai to felicitate Mr. Prabhat Kumar, Chief Executive Officer, CERF Solutions Private Limited, our moderator for this panel session. Also requesting everybody to be with us. We have an amazing session next coming up.
Feel the love all day long. Feel the love all day long.
Thank you, our panelists. And that's not all. From CERF Solutions Private Limited, I shall request upon Prabhat Kumar to please come and give a token of appreciation to all our panelists. Everyone, can we have a huge round of applause for this